Hello everyone, good afternoon. Here we are again, day 3 of our March Madness book challenge. We have 2 new books today. Let's see, we have Little Roja Riding Hood, one of our family favorites here that our boys love and my wife loves to read as well. Nothing Ever Happens on 90th Street is one that I haven't read in a couple years, but I remember it being very good. So remember, A Bad Case of Stripes won our very first matchup day 1. So now we're right below that with Little Roja Riding Hood and Nothing Ever Happens on 90th Street. Salt in His Shoes and Waiting for Pumpsy was our matchup yesterday. Our voting is very close right now. So I think I have it at, we got it 6-5, Pumpsy versus Salt in His Shoes. So I thought, my thinking was Salt in His Shoes was going to be a runaway victory because it's kind of how it was in my classroom. Everybody voted for that one. But it is very close. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a few more hours, or maybe until tonight, or maybe even until tomorrow, until our next video, and then kind of announce the winner of those two. Because I got about half as many views as our first round matchup. So I'm going to give it a little more time and see how that works out. Also, I'm just going to go ahead and read our 2 books today, get those going. I'm going to try to do my best to keep our video a little bit shorter today. And these books seem to be a little bit quicker reads anyway. Again, I believe both of these are AR books. So again, if your child has accelerated reader at their school, they can still log in during the regular school day hours and take the test on these after we read them. So I hope you are all enjoying. If you are, please like, subscribe, share this to your friends. My intention for this is just to give our students something else to listen to, give them another option. I teach special education, which I think I suggested before, or excuse me, that I think I stated before in one of my previous videos. So giving my students alternative to just sitting and reading is always something I try to do, and just giving them the accommodation of somebody reading the book to them, reading with a partner, or audiobooks. So in this case, I'm kind of trying to use these videos as an audiobook option for my students. I am sending the link to them via their Gmail accounts. I also have shared it with some other teacher friends so they can share with their students. Again, just to give students another option while they are out of school. So I hope you guys are utilizing this for educational purposes. That is my intention for this, is that kids are being exposed to different books that maybe they haven't read before, and just giving them another option. So again, we are on our second matchup on this side of the bracket. So if this were like the traditional NCAA bracket, if that was 1 versus 8, then our 2-7 would be there. So this is going to be the 3-6 matchup, I would take it. I did not put these in any order to where they would be ranked. I just kind of did them random. I kind of put 2 football books together, 2 baseball books together, that kind of thing. But I didn't really have any other thoughts as far as the way I put it together. So these are our 2 books today. Little Roja Riding Hood by Susan Middleton Elia, and Nothing Ever Happens on 90th Street by Ronnie Schotter. What I'm also going to try to do for you guys today is put the links for these books. Some of these books I purchased on my own. Some of them were gifted to me. Some of them are from our personal library here at home for our own children. So I'm going to try to put the links to these books for today. That way, if you do like these books and you want them in your own library, your own personal library, or on your own child's bookshelf at home, then you can have that option. I found some of them on eBay or Amazon for $3.99, $5.99, prices like that. So I'll do my best to put a link on there, see if I can figure out how to do that. That way, if you guys do enjoy these books, you can go and buy them. So again, I'm going to announce the winners of Salt in His Shoes and Waiting for Pumpsy in our next video. So please vote on these 2 when we're done today. That way I can post the winners of both matchups. That way I can post the winner for that side of the bracket for Pumpsy and Salt in His Shoes, and then I'll post the winner of this bracket as well to see who will face off against A Bad Case of Stripes. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to set it up this way, sideways today. And I think we will start with Little Roja Riding Hood. So I'll try to give you guys a better view today. I think maybe I'll turn the other way. That way we can utilize our lighting a little bit better. Again, I am not a YouTube expert by any means, so this is totally trial and error. So please, any feedback is welcome. So I'm going to do my best to give you guys a good view here. See if I can do that. So Little Roja Riding Hood. Little Roja Riding Hood by Susan Middleton Aya. All right. This does give a glossary of the different Spanish words that are used in this book. My boys are learning some Spanish words because of this book and other things. I wish I knew how to speak Spanish. I know very little. My wife knows a good amount, but teaching the boys, I think, is important to at least have some key words and phrases to know, especially living in California. All right. There once was a niña who lived near the woods. She liked to wear colorful capas with hoods. Roja, called Mom from her telenovelas. Grow through the woods till you get to Abuela's. She has a bad cough, so take her this sopa. It's muy caliente, don't spill on tu ropa. Be safe in El Bosque, Mama warned her child. Be careful of anything, furry or wild. Sí, said la niña, who left with her basket. Then from a tree came a question. Who asked it? Where are you going in your capa so red? To see me, abuela, Red suspiciously said. Then a large wolf appeared. Look at these flores. Surely your grandma will love los colores. Since she's sick, some flowers are good. She set down her basket, her capa, and hood. While Roja picked blossoms, the wolf sidled off, complete with disguise to inspect Grandma's cough. In cape and capucha, he reached la casita and knocked on the door of the sick abuelita. Abue, he said in a high, squeaky voice, I'm sorry to hear of your terrible tos. Roja, come in. Oh, what a surprise. She noticed at once the size of Wolf's eyes. Tus ojos, she said, so grande the pair. The better to see you. He sat in her chair. Tus orejas, she said, so furry and dark. The better to hear you, was Wolf's quick remark. Then Roja walked up with her lovely bouquet. Somewhere she'd misplaced her capa that day. She peeked in the window and saw her red hood, and inside it, Lobo. Caramba, no good. Sorry, my boys are playing basketball downstairs, so if it's noisy, that's why. Tus dientes, said Grandma, as pointy as daggers. The better to eat you, said Wolf with a swagger. Just then, little Roja burst in the door. And Grandma, no need to play dumb anymore. I won't be your lunch, said Gran. Phony nieta. Some soup, Wolf, said Roja. My mom's best receta. She swung la canasta and out flew the soup. Too hot for Lobo, who soon flew the coop. Ay, caliente, Wolf said as he ran. You saved me, said Grandma, but I need a plan. To keep yourself safe? Of course, no problema. They shopped for a lock and security sistema. And now when folks knock for whatever razon, Abuela's reply is the same set in stone. Just come let me see you, and then she'll unlock it. Of course, Little Red keeps a phone in her pocket. When traveling through woods, she's muy valiente and never leaves home without soup caliente. That's the end. So again, Little Roja Riding Hood, one of our family favorites here. And our next book is Nothing Ever Happens on 90th Street. Now again, I haven't read this one in a few years, but I remember my students enjoying this the last time I did read it. Oh, somebody's here. Dog's barking. Nothing Ever Happens on 90th Street by Ronnie Schotter. Oh, look at that. AR book. There's the AR quiz number. It's a 3rd grade level, and it belongs to me. Uh-oh. Motion at our front door. All right, here we go. Eva unwrapped a cinnamon Danish, opened her notebook, and stared helplessly at the wide white pages. Write about what you know, her teacher, Mrs. DeMarco, had told her. So Eva sat high on the stoop and looked over 90th Street, waiting for something to happen. A horn honked, a radio rapped, a kid cried, the usual. Nothing ever happens on 90th Street, Eva scribbled in her notebook. A few doors down, Mr. Chang was arranging fish fillets in his newly opened seafood emporium. No one was buying, and his shop looked as empty and ignored as the tiny boarded-up store next door to it. He nodded to a woman passing by and called, "Hello to Eva." Let me shut this door real quick here. Sorry about that. Out the door of Eva's building came Mr. Sims, the actor, carrying his enormous cat, Oliver. Mr. Sims was on hiatus again, which meant out of work, in between shows, and so every day, dressed in his finest, he embarked on a daily promenade with Oliver under his arm. "Writing?" he asked. "Trying to," Eva answered. "But nothing ever happens on 90th Street." "You are mistaken, my dear," Mr. Sims said. "The whole world's a stage, even 90th Street. And each of us play a part. Watch the stage, observe the players carefully, and don't neglect the details," he said, stroking Oliver. "Follow an old actor's advice, and you will find you have plenty to write about." "Thanks," Eva said, and fast as she could, using as many details as she could recall, Eva described Mr. Sims in her notebook. His felt fedora hat, his curly gray hair, his shiny button shoes. When she looked up, he was halfway down the street, and Mr. Morley, the moose maker, was at his window. Just as he did every day, Mr. Morley set his chocolate pot and coffee urn out on his ledge with a sign. Mr. Morley dreamed of having a catering business where the fanciest people demanded his dessert. But the trouble was, Mr. Morley's moose was missing something. No matter how he tried, his moose never had as much taste, and Mr. Morley never had many customers. "Writing?" he asked. "Mm-hmm," Eva answered, chewing on her pencil. "Try to find poetry in your pudding," Mr. Morley said softly. "There's always a new way with old words." "You're right," Eva said, wishing Mr. Morley would one day find the poetry in his pudding. Taking his advice, she tried to think up a new way to describe the look of Mr. Morley's moose. Smooth and dark as midnight, or maybe more like mink. Yes, that was it, Eva thought, writing in her notebook. The door to the building slammed, and a gust of wind sent dead leaves soaring and dipping like crazy kites. Alexis Leora nodded to Eva and stepped gracefully down the steps to do her warm-up exercise. Alexis was a dancer. When she wanted to, she could hold an extremely long leg straight up against her ear like a one-legged woman with 3 arms. But she couldn't smile. Eva decided it was because Alexis was lonely. "Writing?" Alexis Leora asked. Yes, Eva answered. Alexis Laura did 6 deep knee bends and then sighed. Stretch, she said sadly. Use your imagination. If your story doesn't go the way you want it to, you can always stretch the truth. You can ask, what if? And make up a better story. You're right, Eva said, thinking, what if? What if Alexis Leora met someone? Would she smile then? What would that look like? Eva closed her eyes to try to picture it, but all she could picture was soup. Spanish soup. Rich and brown and so spicy it seemed as if she could actually smell it. She could. When Eva opened her eyes, Mrs. Martinez was standing beside her. She nodded to Alexis Laura and handed Eva a bowl of soup. Have some, she said. Writers need soup. What's your story about? Nothing much, Eva sighed. Nothing ever happens on 90th Street. Add a little action, said Mrs. Martinez. Like soup. A little this, a little that. And don't forget the spice. Mix it, stir it, make something happen. Surprise yourself. She nodded again to Alexis Leora and went inside. Eva put down her pencil and tasted Mrs. Martinez's wonderful, surprising soup. She thought about her story. It wasn't wonderful. It wasn't surprising. But what could she do? Nothing ever happened on 90th Street. How could she possibly add a little action and make something happen? Eva had no ideas. She was stuck. Then Mrs. Friedman from up the block came wheeling baby Joshua in a stroller. He was holding a bright red ball in 2 tiny, fat hands. Bird, he called out to a pigeon hunting for something to eat. Bird hungry. Pigeon, Mrs. Friedman told him. Eva sighed and looked down at her half-eaten Danish, then at her notebook. She looked at baby Joshua, then at the pigeon. She remembered Alexis Leora's word of advice. What if? Eva thought. Suddenly, she had an idea. What if she stood up, broke her Danish into dozens of tiny pieces, and scattered them wide and wild into the street? What would happen? Eva laughed to think of it. From lampposts to ledges, dozens of pigeons swooped down to dine on the Danish. Eva eagerly picked up her pencil and began to write again. Bird, baby Joshua called out, pointing. More bird, he cried, panting. The bright red ball dropped out of his tiny fat hands and bounced onto the sidewalk. Bye-bye, ball, baby Joshua screamed. The ball rolled off the curb and into the street and straight into the path of the pizza delivery man on his bicycle. Uh-oh. Everyone gasped in horror. Alexa Leora paused in mid-ply and leaped to the rescue. She got there just as the pizza delivery man landed, right side up at her feet. Alexis Leora looked down at the pizza man, and he looked up at her, and then something almost unimaginable happened. Alexis Leora smiled. Are you all right? She asked shyly. Her smile was sweet and bright. Her teeth were straight and white. It was the first time Eva or anyone on 90th Street had seen them. Yes, said the pizza man, smiling up at her. It was love at first sight. Pepperoni and peppers rained down on the happy couple. The pizza man pulled a pepper out of his hair as horns began to honk. Eva added this to her notebook and wondered what could possibly happen next. A long, white limousine was honking its horn loudest of all. The limo driver rolled down his window. What do you want to block traffic for? He called out. The back door of the limo opened, and out stepped a woman in sunglasses, wearing a turban and a coat the color of a taxi. There seems to be a problem, Henry, she said in a fake English accent. There's some sort of accident here, perhaps. "It's Sandra!" somebody suddenly screamed, interrupting her. "Sandra, can I have your autograph?" Mrs. Martinez called out. "Sandra Saunderson?" Mr. Morley blushed. Was Eva dreaming? There, in the middle of 90th Street, larger than life, stood Sandra Saunderson, star of stage, screen, and the sensational soap opera, One World to Live In. "Darlings, what's happening here? I'm sure Larry?" she called out suddenly, and stretched her arms toward Mr. Sims, who had just returned from his promenade. "It's been an age since we saw each other." Mr. Sims' cat, about to be crushed in an extravagant embrace, leaped out of Mr. Sims' arms to chase after baby Joshua's ball. "Oliver!" Mr. Sims called out. "Come back!" Everyone raced into the street after the ball, but it was the limo driver who, in the right place at the right time, leaned into the gutter and picked it up. With a flick of the wrist, he tossed the ball to Mr. Friedman, who presented it to a drooling but grateful baby Joshua. "How's that for a throw?" the limo driver proudly asked the crowd. No one, not even baby Joshua, had a chance to answer. Oliver frightened so many people, raced past Eva, scrambled onto Mr. Morley's ledge, where he knocked over his coffee urn, spilling all the coffee into his moose pot. "Ruined!" Mr. Morley cried, wringing his hands. And that Oliver bounded to the top of the ginkgo tree, where he swayed dangerously like a heavy white balloon. "Now he'll never come down," Mr. Sims lamented. "He's terribly stubborn." There, Larry," Sandra Sanderson comforted him. "I'm sure someone on 90th Street will have a solution." Eva tried to imagine who that could possibly be. "I have one," she heard Mr. Chang call out. Generously he offered trout, fresh from his store, to Oliver. High up in the tree, Oliver barely blinked. "Raw trout?" Mr. Sims sighed. "My regrets, Mr. Chang. He won't eat it. He's a gourmet cat. I'm afraid I've spoiled him. Whatever will I do?" What if, Eva asked herself for the second time that day, and suddenly she had another idea, a truly great one. She whispered it to Mr. Morley, Mrs. Sanchez, and Mr. Chang. "Brilliant!" Mr. Morley exclaimed. And with that, he, Mrs. Martinez, and Mr. Chang, still clutching his trout, vanished into the building. Eva righted Mr. Morley's coffee urn and stuck her finger into his ruined moose, then into her mouth, to determine the degree of damage. "Mocha!" she called out in surprise. "Mr. Morley's moose is mocha now, and—" she paused, trying to find the perfect word. "Magnificent!" she announced to the assembled throng, and giving the pot a stir, she dished out samples to all assembled. "Delicious!" Alexis Leora said, spooning some into the pizza man's mouth. "Poetry!" Sandra Saunders pronounced. Now on 90th Street, people who had never spoken to one another before were speaking at last. The pizza delivery man and the limo driver shook hands, and everyone tried to tempt Oliver down from his precarious perch. And then Mr. Morley appeared on the steps, followed by Mrs. Martinez and Mr. Chang. Mrs. Martinez carried a large pot of her surprising soup, while Mr. Morley carried a platter of Mr. Chang's trout, now surrounded by many tiny vegetables and cooked to perfection. With the addition of a cup of Mr. Morley's cat-created mocha mousse, it was a meal worthy of the finest culinary establishment. "Do you smell that, Oliver?" Mr. Sims called, fanning the steam so it rose up to the ginkgo tree. Oliver took one deep sniff and bolted down the tree to dine. Everyone on 90th Street sampled each course, and everyone on 90th Street sighed with delight. Superb! Fantastico! Yum! Eva smiled and glanced up from her notebook. For the third time that day, she asked herself, what if? Mr. Chang, she began, you and Mr. Morley and Mrs. Sanchez are such great cooks. The boarded up store next to your seafood emporium, what if all of you used it for a restaurant? A restaurant? The three chefs looked at one another. What a wonderful idea, they said, shaking Eva's hand. Everyone on 90th Street could be our customers. You too, Sandra. Everyone but me, Mr. Sims said regretfully. Just now I'm between jobs and a bit low on cash. No longer, Sandra called out. You'll be in my show. I'll arrange it. Mr. Sims kissed Sandra's hand and everyone cheered. What an amazing day, Mrs. Martinez said. Who would believe it? If only someone had written it all down. I did, Eva announced, and she opened her notebook and began to read her story. The same story you're reading now. About how nothing ever happened on 90th Street. What a story, Sandra exclaimed. Full of detail, dialogue, suspense, a bit of poetry, a hint of romance, even a happy ending. Why, you'd almost think some of it was made up. Eva smiled mysteriously. Thanks, she said proudly. But just wait. It'll be even better after I rewrite it. '90th Street Cafe, home of great ideas. And that's the end. All right, so again, please go vote. This video was just as long as our other ones, I think. So Nothing Ever Happens on 90th Street was a little bit longer than I remember it being. Plus my imperfect reading probably didn't help. But I appreciate you all watching and listening again. I hope that you enjoyed the stories. Please help us vote so we can put our winner here. And if you haven't watched the last video, go watch that one so we can vote on Salt in His Shoes and Waiting for Pumpsy, since we're only about one vote separate right now of those two books. So please go watch, listen, share. And again, your students that have accelerated reader accounts, they can take AR tests on all of these books, I'm pretty sure. So during the regular school hours, they should be able to log in. It should work. If you don't have the link at home, email your teacher. I'm sure your teacher will be more than happy to send you guys the link and even their login information if your students don't know it. So again, thank you so much. Mr. A signing off. I will see you tomorrow. Thank you.